Well, good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this morning's Outdoor Recreation Network webinar. My name is Kevin Lafferty, and I'm your MC and your chair for today's event. I have the privilege of serving as an ORN Executive Committee member, and I extend a warm welcome to you all on behalf of the committee this morning. To mute your mics and turn off your cameras, that will help with the bandwidth this morning. And hopefully everybody will have a strong connection. Now, we have some basic housekeeping rules that I think we have to try and stick with this morning, and it'll help the event to run smooth and just give you all a better experience. So once again, for the people who are just arriving, can you please mute your mic and turn off your camera to help with the bandwidth? The webinar is being recorded and made available online following the event. So if you do not wish to appear on screen at any point, please just keep your camera turned off. But if you're happy to use your camera once we go into the breakout rooms, then feel free to turn it on then. Just to remind everybody that we can make comments and we can ask questions using the conversation function. So that's the meeting chat function, and you'll see that on the right-hand side in the toolbar at the top right-hand side of the screen. So if you look at that just now, you'll see a symbol of little peoples that says show participants. You'll see a conversation box that allows you to click on that and then add comments or watch other comments. And you also can have a reaction to that by showing either a thumbs up or a clap or a support. So I know that many of you will be very familiar now with Teams and using Teams, but for some others, this may be your first experience. So if you need any help, just look at those icons and you can interact and use them. During the Q&A session and the breakout rooms, please raise your virtual hand. That way the chairs and the facilitators will know that you have a question and you'd like to come in. When you do come in, if you could introduce yourself and then ask your question, that would be the smoothest way for us to run that. But before we move on, I just want to cover a couple of brief points. And if you've not been to an ORN event before, I would like to extend a warm welcome to any new people if this is your first Outdoor Recreation Network experience. I have the privilege of serving as an ORN Executive Committee member, and the Outdoor Recreation Network is a well-established network organisation, and the vision that we have is encouraging more people to enjoy and engage with the outdoors. Our members come from right across the United Kingdom and Ireland, and we work in collaboration to help share research, facilitate information exchange, and to champion sustainable good practice. So you're in the right place for learning and for information exchange. We have several membership options, including full membership, support membership, and a new category around small memberships. If you're not already a member, I ask you to consider that as an option, and you can sign up and find out more on the ORN website, and there's a welcome pack there. But one of the benefits it provides, for example, is unlimited access to these webinars. And I think over the past year and a half, we've found this has been a really good platform for sharing information right across the UK. So next slide, please, Elizabeth. Great, so we've covered housekeeping. I want to just give you an overview of the programme today and just the running order so that you've got that overview. We're going to start with 3 plenary presentations this morning: an introduction to Scotland's visitor management strategy, and that will be Ken Massey, who's the head of the regional leadership and development within Visit Scotland. And really that's the big picture. What's the experience been in Scotland, and how have we had this collaboration and cross-sector working that's helped us to take a step forward in a more strategic and planned approach to managing visitor services. That will be followed by a more detailed and in-depth presentation, the visitor management strategy, a national overview. And Mark Wrighton from Nature Scot, who's the Recreation and Access Manager, will take us through that. That will be followed by a view from the National Park, the Cairngorms National Park, in one of our iconic landscapes in the UK. I was lucky enough to be up in the Cairngorms last week myself and just to enjoy that amazing landscape. And Pete will talk about, obviously, the impact on the ground and the experience from a national parks perspective. We will then move into a series of breakout rooms. And for the participants today, you should have pre-selected the breakout room that you want to take part in, and you'll be automatically entered into that by the Teams software. Now, if you haven't been allocated a room, just hang about in the main area, and Jane, who's helping in the background, will allocate you into one of those breakout rooms. Now, we want to encourage you to participate today and to be asking questions. So after the three plenary presentations, we'll have a short Q&A with the three speakers. And again, you can use the chat room function to ask your questions, or you can raise your hand at that stage. So at this point now, we're going to move on to our first keynote presentation this morning. And I'd like to welcome Ken Massey. And Ken's going to basically give us a presentation on introducing Scotland's National Visitor Management Strategy. Thanks, Ken.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. Even though I can't see any of you, it's all a bit surreal, but we'll carry on. Could I have the next slide, please? In the next 10 minutes, what I would like to cover is why this strategy was needed in the first place, what we experienced in Scotland in 2020 in terms of the triggers, and then to look at the response that we put together collectively, followed by a little bit on the strategy development and where we are now. And both Mark and Pete will then go into some of the detail in terms of what has actually been delivered against that. I think it's important to note that the requirement for this coordinated approach to visitor management has been an emerging one. It's not something that has happened from a standing start, and some initiatives and activities were underway pre-pandemic, driven by pure visitor volume at certain times of the year at key locations. So seeking to address the related impact on local infrastructure and communities, some activities were already underway. By way of an example, and we can discuss this later in the breakout groups, Visit Scotland delivers the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund on behalf of the Scottish Government. Launched in 2017, there have been 3 rounds of the fund so far that have awarded just under £9 million for capital infrastructure at points where visitor volume and pressure were clearly evident. A 4th round is currently open, and Mark will touch on this, I know, in his presentation as well. Could I have the next slide, please? So as the initial lockdown eased in the summer of 2020, those pure visitor volume issues were exacerbated, as some of those pictures display. This was no longer just about pressures of visitor volume, but dirty camping, inconsiderate parking, littering, toileting, and antisocial behaviour all quickly became very live issues right across the country. Various partner organisations were responding on a local basis. However, it quickly became clear that a more collaborative and partnership-based approach was required that could better coordinate and manage the response to these issues to be both more effective, more efficient, and to remove that duplication of effort. There was a real risk at times of an element of silo working and fragmentation of effort, and that sort of losing sight of the bigger picture. So to come together was absolutely crucial. This massive increase in domestic visitors to Scotland, and especially to the rural and coastal areas, including hotspots like the national parks, was something that rural infrastructure really wasn't prepared for. Pressure placed on communities was increased significantly, with many facilities just basic, such as toilets, waste disposal and car parking, not operational at the time due to COVID protocols and guidelines, so that exacerbated and added to the pressure significantly. It's worth mentioning that further issues emerged in early spring relating to land access, control of dogs, especially around livestock, and lighting of fires at a time where in Scotland, you might find this difficult to believe, but it was a very dry spell, and so the risk of fire as well. Many local communities felt unprepared to deal with this increase in these types of visitors. So it was particularly day visitors, campers and motorhomes. And many of these homegrown audiences, interestingly, seem to be unaware of general guidance around responsible visitor behaviour, and particularly the Scottish Outdoor Access Code. So a consequence of that is in many parts of the country, what we started to see was a bit of a hardening in terms of their attitude and sentiment towards visitors, which obviously we were keen to address. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of the response, a national partnership was led by Visit Scotland with support from Nature Scot, Police Scotland, the National Park Authorities, Forestry and Land Scotland, the local authorities, Transport Scotland, and other partners had been then established to deal with some of these challenges. Initial conversations resulted in a visitor management summit being convened, and that was chaired by the Scottish Government's Minister for Rural Affairs and Tourism. That took place in September last year, and that was a really important catalyst in bringing all partners together and properly kicking off that collaborative and partnership approach. It became clear really quickly that that national leadership was required to support the visitor management aspirations and initiatives. A steering group was formed, including senior decision makers from the key organisations, and I think that's a really important point to note. It had really senior buy-in right across those organisations I've mentioned, chaired by our own Chief Executive in Visit Scotland. And then a strategic framework was developed with 4 key pillars. Each of these pillars then had a lead, and a working group was formed to develop and deliver appropriate actions. The next slide, please. So in terms of the strategy development itself, it's worth noting that the purpose of the visitor management strategy is to develop a Scotland-wide and regional approach to visitor management fit for the 2030 vision. And what I want to mention here is that the visitor management work is completely aligned with the ambition and intent of the new Scottish National Tourism Strategy that was launched in March 2020, just about 10 days before the initial lockdown. It's called Outlook 2030, and that strategy already has a really strong focus on responsible tourism and a clear emphasis on value and not volume tourism. I think it's also worth mentioning that this is not a remedial strategy, it's a really balanced one, seen to also provide a real opportunity to attract new audiences to the countryside, to inform them and to enhance that overall visitor experience for everyone being out and about. In terms of then the strategic pillars that are part of the strategy, so it's very much about informing and educating our current and future visitors. It's about investing in Scotland's current and future visitor management infrastructure and the services that go alongside those. It's about delivering a joined up and cohesive action plan right across Scotland. In some respects, the strategy bit is easy, but when we come down to the delivery of the actions, that's where the results will be measured. And the final one is becoming and remaining a world leader in visitor management, and that world leading aspect conveys the aspirations of the overall tourism strategy for 2030. The strategy was developed to respond to the immediate issues to prevent a repeat of 2020 and 2021, but also then to look further ahead into the medium and slightly longer term, especially on a solutions based. The next slide, please. And so in terms of where we are now, and in response to those immediate issues, there were 3 work streams identified, one around education and marketing, and on that slide 2 of those images show some of the outputs from that, and the key hashtag respect, protect, enjoy, which has underpinned all of the communications activity that again Mark will talk more about. The piece about investment and infrastructure, and then the third area around prevention, regulation and reassurance, which Police Scotland was a key partner on. These 3 groups bring together regional and national partners, so it's a holistic approach. The work streams have been delivering outputs since basically September, and they're supported by an operational coordination group chaired by Nature Scot, which in turn then feeds into the strategy steering group. Coinciding with a second visitor management summit in March 2021, the Scottish Government announced an investment of £2.75 million to be allocated through Nature Scot's own Better Places Green Recovery Fund to provide temporary infrastructure and additional ranger services this year. And then a number of local authorities, in line with the strategy, also announced their visitor management plans and investments. So the Highland Council, for example, has committed £1.5 million for investment in services, including 10 seasonal rangers. In Perth and Kinross, they have £240,000 to establish a senior ranger service, and Fife Council committed £2.1 million to improve toilets, parking and access. So an immediate and really positive response to be built upon for the future activity. All of those are being captured and shared in an action log, which Mark and Pete will have further details on. And it's worth saying at this point that all of the information is available on visitscotland.org. So you can see the action plan, you can see the log of activities and everything that has been delivered for those that are interested. In terms of governance, the steering group remains in place and meets regularly. And following the Scottish Parliament elections last month, we have a new tourism minister and a new cabinet secretary. And the cabinet secretary in particular has taken a really keen interest in the visitor management work and coordinated a meeting just a couple of weeks ago. That's really important for the future funding of the support and the buy-in from government. An autumn visitor management summit will take place in order to evaluate and review the success of the short-term activities that we've been delivering and will be delivering. Many of those have already been put to the test. However, we are monitoring closely as the main summer season kicks in and schools in Scotland break up from the summer from this Friday. So it's important that we keep an eye on that and monitor and evaluate and respond accordingly. And the next slide, please. Clearly, this will be an iterative process, and I don't want to leave you feeling that we've got everything right first time round. There's lots of learning to be done, but we feel that this is very, very positive progress that has been made to date, and a very, very strong foundation has been laid for future visitor management work to take place. And I thought I would leave you with a thank you slide with a much more positive picture than rubbish and broken tents. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over.
Ken, thank you. That was an excellent overview, very insightful, and I think also it sets the context for the next 2 plenary presentations. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's Mark Wrighton. Mark works as part of the People and Places team in Nature Scot, which focuses on outdoor recreation, access, participation and health. He plays a leading role in relation to Nature Scots' statutory duty to promote the Scottish Outdoor Access Code, and he has been working very closely with the recent visitor management work. So Mark has been immersed in this over the past year and a half, and he's very well placed to take us through the visitor management strategy. So over to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Thanks very much, Kevin, and thanks to Ken for that introduction. What I really want to do is build on that a little bit by saying more about the nuts and bolts of the visitor management strategy work that we've been carrying out, and highlight some of the issues that have arisen in the course of that. And I think broadly speaking, the work that we've been undertaking falls into 4 distinct categories, perhaps. On the one hand, building up the evidence base to inform our action, and doing this collectively, drawing on all the resources available to all of the partner bodies. Communication, particularly public facing, but also to other bodies with interests in visitor management, providing better infrastructure and services for visitors, and coordinating action at particular locations on the ground. And as Ken has already mentioned, we've coordinated this primarily through an action log, which we've maintained centrally and shared periodically with the chairs of the different visitor management strategy groups, to ensure that everyone's in the loop and there's a common understanding of the work that each other's undertaking, so that hopefully we minimise and preferably avoid any duplication. So working through those areas in turn, I think the evidence base is clearly an important part of the response to all of these issues, and by taking this collective approach, we've been able to draw on evidence from various sources. Particularly, there's some research that's been undertaken by Nature Scot with partners to monitor the public's reaction to the COVID period in terms of their recreational behaviour and changes in their approaches to the outdoors, and also surveys of access issues arising on the ground, which we've undertaken in conjunction with access authorities across Scotland. And this information, along with intelligence from other sources within the visitor management network, has allowed us to build up an overview of hotspots, areas where there are particular pressures across the country, which I think is very important in being able to plan strategically and target our resources to places where there are issues. But of course, as Ken's mentioned, this is an ongoing process. Some of these issues are still very much live in different parts of the country, and are likely to persist to some degree as long as the restrictions remain in place. So this is an ongoing process, and we need to keep updating the picture that we have through ongoing monitoring. And this is taking place partly through the education and marketing subgroup that Ken referred to, which compiles information on issues arising in different areas through the comms leads of the different participating organisations. And they meet every fortnight to update each other on the main issues and the main focus of communications effort for the next couple of weeks. And then there's also effort underway we're working to coordinate information on a more strategic basis to get a broad picture of issues that are arising, to inform all of the relevant interests, and particularly the Scottish Government, so that everyone has an overview of how things are developing. So looking at now in a little more detail at the communications aspect of the work, there are really 2 main strands to this. One of them is a key part of this is a campaign led by Visit Scotland to support the recovery of the tourism sector, and that's obviously got a strongly promotional emphasis. It's trying to help encourage people back to Scotland, but it's set very much in the context of sustainability. So it's promoting sustainable tourism and also including significant cross-links to the Scottish Outdoor Access Code. And in line with that, there's a complementary strand to the campaign, which is focusing more on the behavioural messages. And there are various parts to this. As Ken's already mentioned, there's quite a lot of evidence now to indicate that the pandemic resulted in a whole new audience being introduced to the outdoors, which is great on the one hand, but it does also bring some challenges in terms of lower awareness of norms of behaviour in the outdoors and of the existence of the Scottish Outdoor Access Code. So part of the objective of this campaign is to reach that new audience with high-level, entry-level messages about responsible behaviour. But that's also supported by more targeted messaging, focusing on particular issues like access with dogs and responsible camping. And as with all behavioural campaigns, I think there are limits to what can be achieved easily, because the campaigns of this type will only tend to reach and to influence people who are willing to hear the messages and are willing to respond. There's an ongoing challenge in reaching the more, shall we say, intractable and difficult audiences, which are only a minority of people but tend to be disproportionately responsible for the issues that attract a lot of attention and cause a lot of problems locally. And reaching that group is much more difficult, and various approaches are being used by various partners to try and do that. For example, working through online influencers who may have the ear of that audience and be able to communicate with them in a way that they're more likely to hear and to respond to. But that's an ongoing challenge. So I think, broadly speaking, the key features of this approach have been that all of these campaigns have been developed collaboratively, and this has the advantage of drawing in everybody's views, hopefully achieving greater buy-in to the messages, and people feeling more comfortable to help spread these messages through their own channels. So it encourages a much more collective effort and hopefully a much wider reach to the campaign. But as I've already touched on, the campaign also needs to be adaptive, because we need to reflect ongoing issues that are emerging. And these include, for example, a noticeable increase in water-based recreation and some particular activities like stand-up paddleboarding, which have been resulting in some concerns in some areas. So hopefully by sharing feedback from different participating organisations, the aim is that we'll be able to pick up all of these issues as they emerge and respond to them by adapting the communications campaign. There are also some areas which have required more intensive effort to develop the messaging, perhaps for various technical or legal reasons, where there are additional complexities that we need to take account of. And we've been able to use the collaborative structure established for the visitor management strategy to provide a more focused joint effort to develop that messaging in key areas like open fires and off-road parking of camper vans. And I've not said a great deal about the other elements of the communication campaign, like messaging to support visitor management, but that is also an important area of work. And we have, for example, worked collaboratively to provide revised guidance on managing camping with tents, working in conjunction with the National Access Forum. And that again is building on experience during 2020. Now, Ken's again already touched on visitor infrastructure, but this is a key area of provision and an important part of the whole visitor management strategy response. I think it's probably generally recognised now that while some of these issues have been brewing for a little while, and in a lot of cases the behavioural problems that we were seeing particularly last year have a lot to do with the lack of suitable infrastructure in key areas to support visits to the outdoors. So obviously trying to address that is a key part of the strategy, and that includes things like providing new temporary facilities of various types, including parking, toilets, litter collection, and facilities for camping, either in tents or with camper vans, and also trying to unblock or address any constraints and ambiguities linked to the regulatory framework, particularly I'm thinking here particularly of camping and camper van facilities. The regulatory framework for licensing this type of provision is quite old and not necessarily well suited to light touch provision. So there are various areas of work that we've been pursuing there. And an important complementary strand to all this is providing additional staff on the ground to support visitor management. And again, this is to people who've been involved in this area for a long time. This won't come as a surprise, but I think the experience during the pandemic has served to highlight the importance of having boots on the ground, people who can liaise with visitors locally, like ranger services or other visitor management staff, as this provides a much more effective and direct way of communicating with people than more impersonal approaches like social media or leaflets. So in line with this experience, there's been a lot of effort around the country to provide new seasonal staff in key areas and to mobilise volunteers from various sources, including, for example, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service cadets and special constables, to help provide more visible staff presence in key areas. And we've supported this with training centrally to try and help get these new staff up to speed. As Ken previously mentioned, this has been supported through various funding streams. The two key ones are the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund, which is managed by Visit Scotland, and the Better Places Green Recovery Fund, managed by Nature Scot. And as Ken has touched on, the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund is primarily focused on larger scale capital projects to provide better tourism facilities, and those tend to necessarily require a longer time scale to implement, whereas the Better Places Fund is much more of a rapid response fund. It's focused on short-term provision that can be put in place for this summer or during this summer, covering either infrastructure or additional staffing. And both of these funds have received additional injections of cash from the Scottish Government to support this effort. And then perhaps the final key strand of work that it's important to mention, I think, is improved coordination on the ground in key areas. And this has been informed by the work that I mentioned earlier to build up the evidence base and identify where the pressures are most acute. And it's been led by the Prevention, Regulation and Reassurance subgroup chaired by Police Scotland. And what this has really been focusing on is getting more coordinated responses on the ground in these areas, particularly to deal with things like traffic management and policing, in order to manage pressures better as they arise at peak periods. And this has been focused on various areas. The key hotspots that we've identified in particular have been the North Coast 500, which is, for those who aren't aware of it, is a promoted route around the north coast of Scotland, which has become quite a focus for tourism activity. In many respects, a great success story over recent years, but with that it's brought some pressures. Also, the national parks and popular areas of Highland Perthshire and the East Lothian coast and the Pentlands to the east and south of Edinburgh. So what are the lessons from this? Well, I think obviously this is still work in progress, and like Ken, I'd be keen to try and emphasize that we don't have all the answers here by any means, and this is still very much a live area of work. But I think some of the positives that we can certainly identify at this stage are the ability to coordinate our effort much more effectively by having this partnership management structure and a common visitor management strategy. I think one of the difficulties in this area is that it's inherently very cross-cutting. Visitor management touches on a whole range of sectoral interests, and there isn't necessarily any one natural lead. So resolving that and identifying a lead body, in this case Visit Scotland, I think has been very helpful. And with that has been the ability to combine our resources better and hopefully get more combined impact as a result of this collaboration. I think a key outcome from this will hopefully be a legacy of continued close partnership working. I think certainly the having to work in this way has had the effect of raising our game in terms of collaboration between the key lead bodies, and that I think has been very positive. And the bottom line is that the consensus, I think, from the feedback that we're receiving from around the country is that yes, some of these issues are continuing to arise, and we're certainly not out of the woods yet, and that's very much what we expected. But we are now in a better position than we were in 2020, and we're better placed to deal with these issues. At the same time, there have, of course, been some challenges, and I think perhaps the most immediately obvious ones during this phase of developing and implementing the visitor management strategy have been the limited time available to do it. As I've said, some of the projects, some of the work that's required, particularly infrastructure provision, does require an inherently longer timescale, and we simply can't put good quality infrastructure in place in the sort of time frame within which we've had to respond to these issues. And another challenge has been the sheer amount of activity taking place within this short time frame. It has had the effect, the experience during COVID has had the effect of galvanizing activity, but that does bring real challenges of coordination. And I think the collaborative structure that we've established has made it much easier to do that. But inevitably, it's not always worked, and there have been areas in which it's been harder to coordinate the work. And that's simply down to how fast things have been happening. Perhaps inevitably there have been technical issues like getting our corporate systems to speak to each other, and finding common finding common conferencing platforms that everyone's corporate systems can work through, but we're gradually getting on top of that. And also, I think, making sure that while we realize the benefits of having a new established structure to coordinate the visitor management strategy work, we don't lose or underplay the role of the existing partnership structures like Scotland's National Access Forum, which have an important role in contributing to the response to these issues. And then looking further ahead, of course, there are more long-term issues which we will need to address, and which attention is increasingly shifting towards. A key one, I think, is maintaining the momentum of all of this work once the immediate COVID pressures become less prominent. And Ken's already noted that the visitor management strategy is linked to the longer term framework for developing the tourism sector in Scotland. And we need to make sure that we maintain the momentum of this work, and it doesn't just drop away once the immediate sense of responding to particular pressures has passed. There's also a longer term challenge linked to all of this, which has been very much highlighted by the COVID experience of promoting slow tourism and putting a greater emphasis on sustainability, which again is something very much that I think was on the radar for Visit Scotland and others within the sector, but which has been highlighted by all of this experience. And then perhaps more generally, the wider challenges of influencing people's behaviour and encouraging more responsible access to the outdoors. And that's an ongoing task, and again, not a new task. But I think the challenges there perhaps are getting better at influencing behaviour where we can, and recognising the limits of that approach, and using other complementary approaches to try and address more intractable problems that don't lend themselves to straightforward education approaches. So that's just a very quick overview of some of the areas of work that we've been covering through the visitor management strategy. But hopefully, if there are any particular points in there that people want to pick up in further discussion, we can do that in the breakout sessions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. That's been really helpful in terms of getting into the detail, I think, and setting the context. I mean, one of the important themes of today's webinar is about how these approaches and this cross-sector collaboration could be applied and used across other parts of the UK. So I think that's been one of the key takeaway messages, has been this connection between the outdoor recreation sector and the tourism, or the national agencies for tourism. And that has really acted as a catalyst to join that discussion up and to get a longer term strategic vision and plan. And I think also just an observation is about the importance of the boots on the ground. I think we've all been aware that there's been a long period of austerity and a lot of the local authority ranger services have been depleted. And what this has done is basically highlighted the importance of having that face-to-face facilitation and the meet and greet function when someone for the first time visits one of our key visitor destinations. Now, hold your questions for the Q&A, which will follow after the next presentation from Pete, and we'll also get a chance to get into some of that discussion during the breakout rooms. But before we move on, I just want to give a brief introduction to Pete. So Pete manages a team working with partners across Cairngorms to ensure visitors have safe, enjoyable and a responsible experience in this iconic and amazing place. He supports partners, visitor infrastructure projects, including improvements to paths and car parks and visitor attractions. So this is getting down to the on-the-ground management of how we deal with this increased demand. And Cairngorms National Park Authority also employ a ranger service, and they work with a wider family of countryside rangers employed by the 13 partners within the National Park Authority, and they, in partnership, welcome people to the national park. So for a lot of our attendees today, you'll be coming from a regional or a local park, and Pete can give you his perspective of having obviously worked with the national visitor management approach. What does this mean locally? What does this mean at a regional level? So Pete, over to you.
Thank you, and if I could have the first slide please. And welcome to Nethy Bridge in the Cairngorms National Park. That isn't quite the view from my home office, but not far off, and the snow's gone down a bit. What I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes or so is share the story of the Cairngorms National Park. And I need to be clear, that's not the story of the Park Authority. It's a collective story of how we've worked with national strategy and guidance together to managing for visitors. And I'll try and be open and honest. I'm telling a story that is going to be really quite positive, but there's also, as previous speakers have raised, some challenges and some difficulties and a reality check. So if we can go to the next slide, please. First, a bit about the National Park. It was designated in September 2003, so we're coming up to being 18 years old. It's 4,500 square kilometres. Well, what does that mean? Well, you can fit the islands of Mallorca and Menorca into the National Park. And one of the reasons for designation is up until 2003, it was not particularly collectively managed for a range of reasons. There are parts of 5 local authorities, that's 5 roads authorities, and if you add Transport Scotland, that's a 6th roads authorities. Nature Scotland and Forestry and Land Scotland split it in half. We have 2 enterprise companies. Even Police Scotland, which is a national organisation now, manages it slightly separately. And in terms of the private sector, we have 3 business partnerships: Cairngorms Business Partnership, Visit Aberdeenshire and Murray Speyside, all promoting and encouraging people to visit the National Park in a slightly different way. If we can move on to the next slide, please. National Park is also home to 18,500 people, those of us who live here. And we've got good data on visitors. We get about 2.1 million visitors, about 4 million visitor days. So it's very much a place about people, but it's also very much a place about nature and people. Over half the national park is designated as international importance. It's a home to a quarter of our rare and endangered species. It is probably the last home to wildcat and capercaillie of any significance in the UK. It is important for people and nature. If we could move on to the next slide, please. What's very useful in taking this work forward was we had extremely good visitor information. Since designation, every 5 years, we have undertaken a visitor survey, a 12-month visitor survey, which has interviewed face-to-face 2,500 visitors across the national park. And coincidentally, our fourth 5-yearly survey was coming to an end in the spring of last year. What that survey does is lots of things. It identifies where visitors come from, their motivation for coming here, and what they want to do. So in the first picture, who and why, we had seen, since designation, we had seen a significant increase in overseas visitors. It had gone from around 18% to about 27%. Clearly, last year that simply stopped. It's also, I think, a surprise to quite a few people that we are a main destination for the people of Scotland. That has always been and continues to be our biggest tranche of visitors. And the rest of the UK, we can break that down a bit more. It is more focused on northern England. So good data on where visitors come from. We'd also got very good data on what they wanted to do. And a surprise to many, in a mountainous national park, in a national park that's got 4 of the 5 highest peaks in the UK, it's actually enjoying the view and a low-level walk that are the key reasons people come here. The other one we've seen grow in the last 20 years is that people want a visitor experience, an attraction, somewhere to go and engage with landmark or one of the exciting attractions. It's still important for mountain walking, high-level walking, and cycling and winter sports. But the main visitor is someone who wants to enjoy a view of the mountains, wants to go for a short walk, and also as part of their day wants to go to a visitor attraction. And having this data was incredibly useful for us, but also presented some challenges as we go on. I think the other very useful thing about visitor data is that Nature Scotland also last year looked at the Scottish population and got some more data on what our residents, what was 48% of our visitors and was definitely grew last year and will continue to grow this year, what they're likely to want to do. So having that information was incredibly important. If we can move on to the next slide. One of the key workshops this afternoon is coordinating visitor management. And I cannot stress how much time we spent working with 3 key groups. The first one was businesses, and we had a tourism, we called it a tourism emergency response group, where we met very regularly with the local authorities, the enterprise company, Visit Scotland, and the tourism business partnerships, the Cairngorms Business Partnership, Visit Aberdeen and Murray Speyside. And this was about collectively initially planning how we were going to reopen, and then as reopening occurred, planning how we were going to get the right comms, the right information, the right messages, and the right experiences to our visitors. The other group we met with, again, very regularly, was land managers, and this overlaps with the businesses for obvious reasons. We met with private sector partners, and that included the larger estates where visitors are very important to their economy, so the likes of Rothian Mercus Estate, Glentanner Estate, but also third sector, National Trust for Scotland and RSPB, and also the public sector with Forestry and Land Scotland and Nature Scotland. Perhaps what I should have said at the start is the Cairngorms National Park Authority, the organisation I work for, we don't own or manage any of the land. So 75% of it is within private ownership, and that's amongst a few large estates, maybe 30 or so large estates. 10% of it is managed by the state through Nature Scotland and Forestry and Land Scotland, and then 15% is in charitable trusts, which again, the two big players are the National Trust for Scotland and RSPB. So bringing these people together was essential for the joined up partnership working. These groups produced last year plans that have never been finished, and they've never been finished because they're active plans. And we've produced 4 visitor management plans, basically breaking the national park into 4 areas: the southern area of the Angus Glens, the eastern area of Royal Deeside, and then Badenoch and Strathspey, the western area down to Highland Perthshire, and one other specific area, which was Glenmore and Cairngorm. Many will have heard of the Cairngorm Mountain Ski area, but it is the area that's linked to Aviemore and gets at least 1 million visitors a year. It's one of our very busy areas. The third overlapping group, because all these groups do overlap, was communities. And what we found very quickly is that we all collectively needed to engage well with communities. So every quarter, in partnership with the Cairngorms Business Partnership, with Visit Cairngorms, we have hosted a series of meetings with local authority councillors, so representatives of the 5 local authorities, community councillors, and then with residents. And those meetings have really been about sharing collectively how we're planning for reopening, how we are managing visitors, and asking the questions really openly and really honestly about what's going well and what do we need to do better. And the meetings that we had with the communities, I think, brought to light, brought to reality some of the challenges. Half our economy is based around visitors, so there were people within the communities who needed reopening now. And there were people in the communities who were genuinely concerned about what reopening would mean to them, initially about COVID and their health, and then as the time grew on, about the impact of over-visitors and some of the behaviour. We've hosted 4 of those meetings, one each quarter, and the next one is due at the beginning of next month. Absolutely essential to openly share what's happening and what we can do. If we can move on to the next slide, please. One of the other key ones was communications, and about getting our communications. So before Respect, Protect and Enjoy, with the Cairngorms Business Partnership, we did Cairngorms Together. Know, plan, be flexible and be kind. Simple messaging was about getting out what toilets were open, what car parks were open. And one of the challenges we faced last year was that the countryside was open before the facilities were, and getting that message across there. And that was about sharing with that community groups that I've discussed before. I'll come back to messaging a bit, but next slide, please. If we can have the next slide, if that's possible. The other thing we found in the 21st century was that it wasn't just about messaging on the ground, it was about getting staff out on the ground. So we employed 8 seasonal rangers last year. We've negotiated a better budget this year, and we've now got 5 permanent and 9 seasonals. Partners across the National Park have also increased their rangers. So Forestry and Land Scotland, National Trust, or RSPB have also got staff on the ground. Getting that message out there just isn't about social media. It isn't about leaflets. It's about staff on the ground. Oh, that is the next slide. We also used some variable road signs in the hotspots, about places that were busy. Those would tell you if car parks were full, etc. And the use of those variable road signs has continued this year, focusing on areas that were busy. If we could move on to the next slide. Everyone has talked about new audiences, and everyone has talked about irresponsible behaviour and the need to follow the outdoor access code. Yes, we saw an increase. We saw an increase in rubbish camping, if you like, and in fires. But we need to take a check here. Pre-COVID, Mar Lodge Estate in the National Park, pre-COVID in 2019, saw 70 fires that were, if you like, irresponsibly lit in not safe places. So it was here before COVID, and we did see a glow. We focused a lot of our messaging on fires, on littering, and on human waste. One of the challenges I think collectively we face is agreeing clear, concise, and consistent messaging. The 30-mile-an-hour road sign kind of works because it's standard across Scotland, and we all know people still break it. But I think one of the challenges in that messaging is getting it so it's simple and easy and the same across the national park and across Scotland. In terms of new audiences, yes, we recognise that we were communicating with the general visitor, the visitor we knew, and with RSPB we used new social media talents. Callum McLean did a very good video for us on camping. We've also needed to get information out, and the Visit Cairngorms, the Cairngorms Visit Partnership, have got information out about camper vans. And very pleasing that Co-op Scotland is not selling disposable barbecues this year. Next slide, please. Oh, the slide must be stuck. It's simply returning to the need to keep communicating, yes. We kept going back to communities, businesses and land managers and listening and sharing and changing what we did as COVID restrictions changed, as behaviour changed. And this year we're getting very, very good feedback on what attractions are open so that we can promote that. We're also getting good feedback from the family of Cairngorms Rangers on, are they seeing more camper vans? Are they seeing more changes in behaviour, so we can get that messaging across. Next slide, please. I'll carry on with the slide will come. Another key topic is new infrastructure. We also reallocated some of our budget to partners to share the upgrade of car parks at Mar Lodge, Lochgarten, Rothimercus, and in path improvement. One of the challenges is to do this quickly and to do it within the law. Planning consent, challenges there. It's time consuming. Here is a picture of Glenmore, our most visited rural location in the national park, and this was the subject of Rural Tourism Infrastructure Funding, RTIF funding. So what you're seeing there is a roadside path being built from the visitor centre to the beach. And it's the first time in the 35 years I've been working in and around this area that I can now walk on a path to the beach. So great to see such infrastructure. We're planning ahead with partners on what needs done. But one of the challenges, I think, is that when you see something that needs done, we're probably looking at 18 months to 2 years if we want to build a new car park or extend a new car park. So it's not all quick fixes. Last slide, please. I think what I'd like to finish off with is a reality check in the positive way. Our rangers on the ground, it's now amounting to about 50 staff across the partnership, the family of rangers. The vast majority of visitors we encounter are already doing the right thing or are not sure what the right thing is to do. And the right communication encourages that. Our Vista surveys of old identified that 96% of people would tell us they loved the Cairngorms. The other 4% didn't not like it, they just weren't a bit sure about what answer they wanted to give. So we're all concerned about responsible behaviour, we all want to improve it, but it is still a minority. And one of the ways that we can change that minority is collectively work together with the same messages, supporting the right infrastructure and the staff on the ground that are there to welcome them to have a great experience. That's a summary of 15 months of challenging work and some great partnership input. I hope that's been very useful.
Thank you, Pete. That's been really insightful, and I think it gives a perspective from a regional area, and it also highlights the importance of communication, talking to the partners and engaging with the communities, the businesses and the land managers and owners. So I think that's a takeaway that we can all, take on board for our own practice when we get back to our day-to-day jobs, that we need to continue to have that communication and to have consistent and clear messaging, both at a regional and at a national level. Now, time is marching on, and I want you to basically take your key questions and your key points into the breakout rooms so that we have time for the wrap up and feedback from the facilitators of the breakout rooms. So breakout room 1 is on communication campaigns with Mark Wrighton. Breakout room 2 is staff on the ground with Pete Crane. Breakout room 3 is about the new infrastructure with Ken Massey from Visit Scotland. And breakout room 4 is about coordinating visitor management in key hotspots with the ORN Executive Committee member Ali Kohler. So I want you to think about the discussions within the breakout rooms, and really that's reflections on aspects of the presentations, the key questions or observations that you had that you want to share, and any additional learning or insight from the organisations. Now the challenge here is for each of the facilitators to come back with 1 or 2 key points to feedback to the whole audience. And also, because the event's been recorded, you will be able to watch this and get the information on the other breakout rooms after this event. So you can go back and dip back into those individual breakout rooms to get that information. Now we're moving towards rapid updates, just a sort of 60-second soundbite from each of the 4 workshops. So I'm going to kick off with Ken. Ken, can you give me the 1 or 2 key points from your breakout room, please? Yeah,
thanks, Kevin. That was an incredibly rapid 20 minutes. So the couple of things, key points. Fiona from Forestry Land Scotland shared the activity that they've been piloting in terms of using some of their car parks for self-contained overnight stays for motorhomes, and the success of that pilot that they're rolling out again, and obviously making the point that it's not without its problems, but actually the availability and the positioning of the sites has been really important in terms of the success of that. So a really useful pilot activity. And the other point was around accessibility. So we had Shail Patel, a representative from Disabled Ramblers, and just the consideration that is being placed with new infrastructure about access for disabled people on pathways and to beauty spots, etc., and for all the related facilities that come with that. So I thought they were 2 very relevant and useful points to raise. That was about 60 seconds, I think, Kevin.
Well done, Ken. That's really helpful and succinct. So we're going to move rapidly over to Mark now for your couple of key points.
Okay, I think in our discussion about communications, I think a couple of points selected from many that were made. I think, were the difficulties of reaching audiences who are perhaps not represented by or different from the people who are responsible for coordinating a lot of the messaging. So the challenges perhaps of reaching new recreational participants in particular and getting the messaging across to them. And also some interesting discussion about the effectiveness of messaging and finding ways to monitor this better, and the potential value of research to find new ways of doing this and different approaches to monitoring the effectiveness of messaging, accepting that it can be quite challenging to do that.
Thanks, Mark. That's really helpful. We're going to move on to Pete now for 2 key points.
Well, I'm going to put a half point in, because accessibility was also raised in our discussion, and the challenges faced by making it accessible for all. In terms of the focus of our discussion, it was about ranger services and how do we ensure that they are trained and delivering appropriately, because we've had a downturn over the last 20 years in rangers. So are they all across the UK working to the best quality? Do we need to look at national training again? And also, how do we sustain them? A lot of these posts are seasonal. Are they permanent seasonal, or are they job share? So they're doing something different for the same organisation in the winter. More questions than answers, but very good questions that we do need to answer.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And I think that's a valid reflection, that we welcome new people into the ranger and countryside ranger roles. But yeah, it's that training need. Ali, can we move on to your update, please?
Thanks. I'll try and keep it short. I think there was consensus about the need for more boots on the ground, so the ranger services, and I was going to raise exactly the same issue about how do we sustain them into the future. We've got short-term funding, but they're going to be needed in the longer term. We had discussions about how long these trends are actually going to continue in terms of people continuing to want to come to these sites, and the importance of data. And we had an example of Northern Ireland, who have done some really good work on motivations, which maybe we need to look at across England. And we also touched on, what about the longer term solutions? It's good to improve our infrastructure, but what about green transport into the future? The role of e-bikes, public transport and electric cars, and how do we integrate all of that?
Thanks, Sally. Really useful points, and obviously we can all benefit from the post-webinar recording to go into those individual breakout rooms and just to look at the feedback. Now, you'll see the link on screen to your delegate form. If you can complete this post-event and send it back, it's really helpful for the Outdoor Recreation Network. It helps us to hear the views from our members and also to improve future events. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, and just that reminder that in due course you'll have access to the post-event resources and recordings, and you can watch that on demand. And we've found that actually the follow-up has been really useful, so tell your colleagues about it, tell other people who couldn't make it today. This is a way for them to access this information and to share. And I think that's what the ORN is all about. It's about sharing best practice and lessons from right across the UK. Now, we're just a couple of minutes over time, so I'm just going to wrap up now. And a final couple of observations. Firstly, I just want to thank our keynote speakers, Ken, Mark and Pete, for giving their time and sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today. I'd also like to thank Ali for chairing the breakout room, and to Elizabeth and Jane in the background who've made this very smooth and obviously dealt with any of the IT issues. If we can share the slide now, dates for your diary. I think this is very relevant for people. try and put these save the dates in your diary, what mapping data is telling us, key learnings from engaging the new visitor on responsible use. This came out today. This is an opportunity to continue that conversation. Obviously our festive gathering, which is always a fun one, and a really good chance for us to just share that networking opportunity in a more informal way. And then finally, our main two-day conference, and the topic is still to be confirmed, but we're actively looking at a number of areas. This has been obviously under consideration and discussion. So in terms of my prerogative as chair today, I just want to remind the new members who've joined us for the first time about the membership opportunities. If you're not already a member, please consider it. I think it's a really good way for you to network and to feed in right across the UK. And obviously this new small membership is more affordable for charities and NGOs and smaller organisations. And you can see the list of benefits there. So in summary, I think, what we've found today is a very successful approach in Scotland. It's not been easy, it has had its challenges, but I think this approach could be applied and used in other parts of the UK. And the key observations, I think, has been this cross-sector collaboration about bringing the key public bodies and agencies together with the National Tourism Agency. And one of the things that's really helped that to happen in Scotland has been these dedicated visitor management summits. So it would be great to see something similar happening in Wales, England or Northern Ireland to start the conversation. And also that the political leadership was really key. That acted as the impetus to bring all of the partners together at a very senior level. So if you have a political champion or an advocate who could help facilitate or call for that round table type event, I think that's a way forward. So thank you for participating today, for giving your time. It's been a pleasure. And check out the post-event resources and materials. So I hope you get out now to enjoy some fresh air and sunshine yourself. Thank you for coming.